My name is Stephanie Morgan. I'm 42, and I work the graveyard chorus of machines and breath at Oregon Regional, ER Trauma, the place where holidays don't pause for miracles. The digital clock on my dashboard blinked 12 as I turned into our driveway, and though the calendar insisted it was now officially Christmas Eve, the spirit of it felt like something I had left behind between the third code blue and the fifth car crash victim whose sternum I pressed beneath my palms until my shoulders burned. 14 hours of adrenaline hangovers clung to my scrubs. The smell of antiseptic and coffee lived in my hair. I told myself the house would be dark. Michael was out of town on business until morning. Our daughter, Maya, 16, had texted she was headed to my parents for their annual Christmas Eve dinner. The thought of her laughing among relatives, offering the sugar cookies she'd practiced all afternoon, was the one bright ribbon threaded through a long, bruising day. The door opened into a warm spill of lamplight. I stopped. On our sofa lay Maya, curled tight, still in the winter coat she'd thrown over the dress she'd tried on 4 separate evenings, turning in front of my mirror and asking, "Is this nice enough for Grandma's dinner?" Now the satin was wrinkled at the waist, the hem creased where she'd tucked her knees to her chest. Dark hair fell across her cheek. Her chest rose and fell with the shallow rhythm that belongs to restless sleep. On the coffee table sat an untouched plate of food and a tin with its ribbon perfectly tied, the sugar cookies cut like snowflakes, dusted with fine crystals that had seemed to make her proud. The tin might as well have been a sealed confession. "Maya," I whispered, kneeling, my voice stepping lightly in the quiet. Her eyelids fluttered. For a heartbeat, something raw and naked, fear, shame, disappointment, flashed across her face before she tugged a smile into place, a thin thing that never reached her eyes. "You're home early," she rasped. "What happened, sweetheart?" I brushed hair from her forehead. Her fingers were ice in mine. She studied our intertwined hands as if the truth might be written there. Grandma said there was no room at the table. There is a kind of pause that feels like missing a stair in the dark. My heart found it. "No room," I said. "There were a lot of people," she answered, voice shrinking to fit inside the memory. "Neighbors, Dad's cousins, a couple from Grandma's bridge club." Images snapped into place with a cruel clarity. My daughter, proud of the little Toyota she'd had for 3 months, parking where Uncle Jack always parks because that's the way it's done, checking her hair 100 times, carrying her gifts and that careful tin like a promise. "I got there at 6, she continued softly. Grandma opened the door with that smile. "You know the one." I did know it, the one that says welcome to some and why are you early to others. She said they weren't expecting me until you arrived, so they hadn't set a place. The guest room was full of coats. I could wait in the kitchen if I wanted. I saw the dining room I grew up in, stretched with the extra leaves the way it always is for holidays, napkins folded into tidy trees, silver catching light. 26 people, Maya said. She counted. Aunt Carla and Uncle Jack and their kids. Mrs. Peterson from next door. Mr. and Mrs. Lambert with their bridge club laughter. 24 chairs scraped into place, and somehow not a single one for my child. I undid Maya's buttons, slid the coat from her shoulders. The fabric was damp and heavy at the cuffs. I left the gifts and cookies, she whispered, and drove home. It was raining, but it wasn't too bad. It was bad. It was bad in the way that reshapes a girl's sense of where she is allowed to stand. There is cold that climbs from weather, and then there is the cold of being positioned at the threshold and told to wait. I felt the second kind move through our living room like a draft you can't find the source of. I helped her sit up, smoothed the wrinkles from the dress out of habit more than hope. They didn't run out of chairs. Mom, she said finally, and her voice was small but steady. They just didn't want me sitting there. Something inside me aligned with a click I could nearly hear. For 8 years, I had paid for the house my parents live in, the house I bought outright when my father, Raymond, lost his job and foreclosure loomed like a storm cloud. I'd paid the property tax, the insurance, the utilities, the repairs. I'd transferred money to Carla, my younger sister, for her children's private school tuition. I'd bought laptops that lit up other kids' faces while teaching Maya to ask for watercolors and good paper and call it plenty. I had done it while absorbing the catechism of subtle contempt. My mother, Helen, with her practical dismissals, my father's fancy degree jabs, Carla's syruped refrains that cast my education as abandonment. Every holiday held barbs disguised as jokes. Every gathering was a performance of family values without the value. And like many eldest daughters trained into peacekeeping, I'd told myself that swallowing hurt was an act of love. But love is not the same as self-erasure. And whatever had allowed me to blur that line for decades burned away in the look on my daughter's face. I tucked her in beneath the quilt my grandmother made in a different century, in a different moral geometry. Never again, I said into the dim, more vow than comfort. Her breath lengthened, as if her heart had heard the sentence and believed it. The front door opened and closed a few minutes later. Michael's steps crossed the living room, followed by the soft thud of his suitcase by the hall table. "Steph," he called. I met him halfway, and in that space between us, the quiet room, the perfect tin, the untouched plate, I told him what had happened. I watched disbelief move across his features, the kind of shock that belongs to people raised inside families where this particular brand of cruelty would be unthinkable. "They turned her away," he said, almost to himself. I nodded and felt something cold but clarifying settle in my chest. Not a hardness, a lens. Through it, I could see the familiar arrangement I used to mistake for fate. My mother's petty tyrannies smoothed with etiquette. My father's acquiescence lacquered as duty. Carla's jealous silences that always broke into requests when a check needed cutting. Through it, I could see that there had never been a shortage of seats, only an appetite for hierarchy. And there, down the hall, slept the person who needed me to choose her over a story I had been trained to repeat. Here is the truth no one tells you about boundaries. They are not a declaration of war. They are the edges of a table you set for the people you are responsible for feeding. Some tables you expand with leaves and laughter, Some you walk away from and lock the door behind you, even when the people at it share your last name. Standing in my own entryway, the couch light soft on the tins and paper and ribbon, I crossed that threshold without saying it out loud. A parent's compassion for everyone else will eventually be asked to bow to the protection of their child. That moment had arrived. At dawn, my body woke as if the trauma pager had gone off. In the small office off the kitchen, I unlocked the bottom drawer and slid out manila folders I had kept for records, the way women keep ledgers of unacknowledged labor. I didn't need to read the numbers to know what they spelled, but when Michael stood behind me and laid a steady hand on my shoulder, I began anyway, lifelines of ink that would become, in time, a map out. For now, I closed the file again. The legal work, the paper trail, the letters and signatures, all that would come. The decision had already been made in the doorway when I lifted a wet coat from my daughter's shoulders. I hung the coat on the hall rack where the heat would reach it, set the cookie tin on the kitchen counter, and filled the kettle. Steam lifted into the morning like a benediction. I thought of the way Maya had measured flour with concentration, the way she'd dotted sugar like frost, the way she'd asked if Grandma would like the shape of the snowflakes. I thought of how small joy can be, and how easy it is for an adult to flatten it with one practical sentence. In the quiet, I pictured another table, the one I would choose from now on, set with chairs for those who come with respect and leave us whole. Somewhere between the whistle of the kettle and the first pour of hot water, I understood the shape of the next chapter. They said there was no room for my daughter at their table, I said aloud. Not to anyone present so much as to the woman I had been until last night. Then there is no room left in our lives for cruelty. I carried the mug to Maya's door and stood listening. Her breath moved in a calm, even tide. That, I decided, was the only Christmas carol I needed this year. Christmas morning didn't arrive with hymns and wrapping paper. It arrived as columns and dates and the quiet click of a filing cabinet that had been waiting years to be opened. My body woke at dawn the way it always does after a night shift, alert, braced, listening for a call that didn't come, and I went to the small office off our kitchen with a mug I only half remembered making. The bottom drawer stuck the way it always sticks. I tugged, it yielded, and there it was, the paper life I'd built for other people to stand on. Michael appeared at the doorway, hair still mussed, tie draped over one shoulder like a flag after a parade. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" Or "We can talk later." He simply crossed the room, put one hand on my shoulder, and stayed there like ballast as I began to lay the past 8 years across the desk. The checkbook told the story first, in neat blue ink that I'd always labeled mortgage support, as if saying it that way made sense of something no longer true. One line, repeated every month, for $300. I flipped, the way you flip a deck of cards in an old trick, each page slapping the next until the rhythm became obscene. "Over 100,000, Michael said softly, not as judgment but as math, the kind you can't bargain with. He squeezed my shoulder, not to stop me, but to say keep going. Property tax statements, stamped and official, slid into the light. At the top, the name, mine alone. No co-owner. No lien. No balancing act. I could feel my face heat, the way shame and clarity arrived together. I didn't help with their mortgage, I said, because saying it out loud stiffened the spine of the truth. There wasn't one. I bought the house when Dad lost his job. Michael nodded, jaw working in the quiet. And the monthly payments? Utilities. Insurance. Maintenance. The water heater in 2019. The roof seal in 2021. The tree removal after the February storm. Each word dropped like a small stone in a deep well, and still the water didn't overflow because the well was deeper than I'd allowed myself to know. I pulled out bank statements next, a pale blue drift of paper that had carried Christmas and summer and school years on its current. Regular transfers to Carla labeled tuition or school fund, as if the avoidance of the word private made the thing less heavy in my hands. Credit card bills itemized with Cousin Lily's laptop for coding class, $990 before tax, and a pair of gaming headphones for her brother. While on the page where Maya's requests lived, the handwriting got small. Watercolors, good quality, and paper, cold press. On the margin of last December's statement, my note surfaced like a fossil. Helen says Maya's ask is finally reasonable. The quotation marks made the word colder. I found the small leather journal we'd spoken about in the gray hour before sunrise. Maya had tucked it between mattress and box spring, private but not hidden, and with a sleepy nod, she'd given me permission to read the pages she'd dog-eared. The handwriting was neat, careful, the way she writes when she thinks someone might see it. Grandma told everyone my art award wasn't real because my school gives them to everyone. It was the regional showcase, one student per high school. Cousin Lily's recital today. No room in the car, but later they posted a picture from 2 cars. Christmas at grandparents'. All cousins got Apple Watches. I got socks. Mom looked sad. I didn't tell her not to make it worse. Thanksgiving. I ate early at home and said I was tired. Grandma said I make things complicated. Each entry was a pin in a map of a territory I had pretended was passable. Together, they drew a border I would no longer cross. Michael read over my shoulder, his breath catching at the line about the Apple Watches. He didn't speak right away. When he did, he placed the words precisely, as if building a bridge rather than throwing a rope. You've been their safety net for years, he said, and they've been Maya's nightmare. He wasn't blaming me. He was diagnosing the structure. The difference matters. I texted Sarah Williams, friend first, attorney second, the woman who had talked me through closing costs and title searches 8 years ago, who had handed me keys and said, half joking, "You own your choices now." Her reply came fast. I'm 10 minutes away with coffee and a legal pad. Don't touch anything. I almost laughed at the last instruction. What do you touch when you're holding 8 years of your own reluctance? Sarah arrived in a wool coat with rain on the shoulders and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the deed, at the checkbook, at the stack of utility accounts that wore my name like a uniform, and her pen began its steady scratch. They're tenants at will, she said, tapping the property tax statement. No lease, no rent, no rights beyond what state law gives them by default. You can serve a 60-day notice to vacate. We'll draft today. We'll also terminate any implied financial support in clear language. You'll send both certified. The words 60-day notice rose in the room like a chord. In my chest, something unclenched and then braced. Is that cruel? I asked, because the old script still tried to speak through me. Sarah didn't look up from the page. Is it cruel to stop someone from taking advantage of you? Is it cruel to protect your daughter? She glanced up then, met my eyes. Cruelty was a 16-year-old in a winter coat on her grandmother's sofa, told to wait in the kitchen because the guest room was full of coats. We worked in a rhythm that felt foreign and clean. I signed where she placed tabs. Michael organized piles into logical stacks, payments, property, gifts, school transfers. I opened my laptop and created a folder, documentation. Inside it, subfolders, property records, bank statements, communications, social. In communications, I made a new document titled Timeline and began with last night, 12:24, Maya arrived at 6 p.m. So told no seat at table, offered kitchen. I added the names that floated up from Maya's recollections, neighbors present, bridge club present, Carla and family present. As I typed, I felt the old shame. Am I overreacting? Try to shrink my sentences. I widened them back to their proper size. Sarah reviewed what I'd assembled so far. Expect a performance, she said dryly, and I knew she meant Helen's tears and Raymond's long-suffering sighs and Carla's Facebook catechism of family. You'll get scripture quotes about honoring parents. You'll get veiled threats about reputations. You'll get calls to your workplace. So we prepare. Her pen moved. 1. Notice to vacate, 60 days. 2. Termination of financial support, effective immediately. 3. Certified mail receipts. 4. Communication log. And, she added, we keep the language boring. The more they dramatize, the more the record needs to stay calm. Boring language, calm record. The opposite of how my family had taught me to survive, by smoothing, by soothing, by translating crisis into compromise until I couldn't tell who I was protecting. I looked at the journal again, at Maya's line about not telling me so I wouldn't feel bad. It landed where it needed to. This isn't about one dinner, I said, more to myself than the room. It's about what Maya believes she's worth. Michael slid a letter opener across the desk to me, a gentle ritual. Open the next thing, he said. I did. It was a bank auto payment confirmation for my parents' utilities, the recurring transfers I had set up years ago, because it was easier than dealing with another frantic phone call about a shut-off notice. We'll go to the bank after breakfast, he said, already moving toward his shoes. You'll end these. You can request printed records of everything to date. Sarah nodded approval. And after that, you'll block and filter, she said. Their emergency doesn't have to become your crisis every time their phone lights up. I thought about social data that never shows up on paper, the way eldest daughters mediate the family weather, holding the umbrella over everyone else. I thought about the studies I'd read on caregiver burnout, and the way honor thy father and mother is often weaponized to mean accept the harm without protest. I thought about Pastor Thomas, our kind, practical minister, who had once said in a sermon that honoring parents includes honoring the part of them that wants you to live a life they couldn't imagine. Boundaries, he'd said, are not walls to keep love out. They are fences that keep love growing where it can actually thrive. Maya patted in, hair mussed, an oversized sweatshirt swallowing her hands. She stopped at the doorway, taking in the desk-turned operating table, the manila folders like open chests. "Are we doing something?" she asked carefully. I met Michael's eyes and found my reflection steadier than I expected. "We are," I said. "We're making sure the people we love are safe. That starts with you." She came closer, looked at the journal, then at Sarah's legal pad with its tidy rows. "Will Grandma be mad?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "because truth is a muscle that strengthens with use." But being mad and being right are different things. Maya nodded, slow and grave in a way that made her look older. "Do you need me to do anything?" she asked. I thought about it and then handed her a pen. "If you're willing," I said, "help me build the timeline. We'll stick to facts. Dates. What was said? What happened next?" She took the pen without flinching. "Okay," she said. "Facts are easier than feelings." By noon, the first draft of 2 letters lay on the desk, the 60-day notice to vacate, addressed to Helen and Raymond at the house I owned, and the termination of financial support letter, effective immediately, itemizing the automatic payments that would end. The sentences were as unpoetic as a hospital discharge summary. That was the point. I signed both with a hand that didn't shake. Michael watched me, worry and pride braided in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be." We sealed the envelopes. Sarah slipped them into her briefcase with the certified mail forms in rows, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "I'll file and send today," she said. "Document everything that follows. No fights on porches, no back and forth in comment threads. If they tear up the notice, we send another by certified mail. If they call your work, you notify HR and log the time. Calm record. Boring language." After she left, the house held its breath. Somewhere down the hall, the kettle clicked off. Michael reached for my hand. From the living room, the Christmas tree lights, small, steady, reflected in the office glass. This, I thought, is what a line looks like when you draw it with both love and law. I looked at Maya, who had already begun to write the first line of our timeline in careful, even letters. 12:24, no seat at table. Offered kitchen. Left gifts. Drove home in rain. "Good," I said softly. "Start there." And then, for the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me that wasn't resignation. It was resolve. The letters went out the same day, Sarah moving with that practiced efficiency that makes other people's catastrophes start to look like paperwork. At the post office, she slid the certified mail receipts toward me. I signed where she pointed, the way I've signed consent forms in the ER when time is thinner than air. On the drive home, Michael's hand found mine at red lights. A snow flurry licked the windshield and then quit, like the weather changed its mind. I didn't. The decision was no longer a thought I kept in my mouth like a lozenge. It was a spine that held me upright. The first response came faster than the tracking updates. At 10 a.m. now, the next morning, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Helen, cheeks high with color, Raymond a step behind, with the posture of a man who wants to be anywhere else. I opened the door but left the latch in place. "This," Helen said, brandishing the envelope, "is a mistake." Her tone tried on concern first, as if she were correcting a clerical error at a bake sale. "We can talk about this as a family." "I've already talked," I said, keeping my voice level. "The notice is clear." Her smile thinned. "After all we've done for you." The phrase was so familiar it belonged on a sampler. "We made sacrifices, Stephanie." She stripped the envelope open, pulled out the 60-day notice, and tore it in half like a magician who hadn't learned the part where you put things back together. The pieces fluttered to the porch. A neighbor's wind chime clinked, bored. "There," she said. "Now we can be reasonable." "You'll receive a certified copy," I replied. "Any further communication should go through my attorney." Raymond looked at the torn halves, then at me, his mouth opening and closing around words that couldn't bear their own weight. "Lily's robotics camp is next month," Helen said suddenly, as if the right detail might unlock the old version of me. $800. "You can handle that, and we can put this behind us." "No," I said. A syllable small enough to fit in the palm of my hand and somehow heavier than the cash I'd carried to every crisis. I closed the door gently, as if quiet made it kinder. I expected shaking. I didn't shake. By noon, Dad's voice arrived in my voicemail, an old instrument playing an old tune. "Phew, Stephanie," he said, weary, reasonable. "You're blowing this out of proportion. Your mother is upset. Call us back so we can straighten it out." Straighten it out was the family euphemism for put everything back on your shoulders. I pressed delete and logged the call. Time, date, summary. Calm record. Boring language. The social hurricane hit by late afternoon. My phone lit up with names that hadn't lit it in months. Aunt Susan. "Honey, are you having a breakdown?" "Call me." Uncle Robert. "What's this nonsense about evicting your parents?" Cousin Beth. "Maybe speak to Pastor Thomas about honoring thy father and mother." I didn't reply. I added each to the timeline under a new header, Extended Family Outreach, and kept the descriptions factual. The urge to explain, my oldest, truest reflex, rose like heartburn. I swallowed it. Explanation is a currency you can spend forever without buying a single boundary. I found out about Carla's post when a colleague texted a screenshot, the edges still glittering with the cloying sympathy Facebook gives itself. Prayers needed for my elderly parents facing homelessness, because my sister has abandoned her family responsibilities. Some people forget who was there for them when they needed help. 17 shares before lunch. Little prayer hands marching down the screen. I took a screenshot, saved it to the social subfolder, and closed the app before it could tip me into the old spiral of rebuttal drafts and imaginary arguments. Sarah's voice in my head. Don't litigate in the comments. Litigate on paper. At 3, I sat across from a pleasant-faced bank manager who had the misfortune of being the person between me and the lever I needed to pull. "These automatic transfers," I said, sliding a list across the desk. "All of them end today." He nodded, eyes flicking over the account numbers. "They've been in place for 8 years?" His face said he'd seen stranger things. His tone suggested he hoped this one ended without tears. "I'll also need printed records of every payment to date," I added. He clicked. The printer warmed. I breathed as if the room were the trauma bay, and this was a routine intubation. Step by step, no drama, the way competence looks when it stops trying to be liked. Back home, I built a wall. Not the kind that keeps people out, the kind that holds the weight of a house. On the corkboard above my desk, documents multiplied, deed with my name, property tax statements, utility accounts, bank records, Sarah's draft letters, Carla's post, a printout of my timeline with new entries marching in clean lines. It was a collage of the last decade's invisible labor brought into light. Beneath it, I taped a single sentence, a clinical diagnosis in black marker, pattern of targeted exclusion and financial exploitation. In the evening, my phone buzzed with a call from Pastor Thomas. He has the voice of a man who has officiated both weddings and funerals, and knows that most human messes are not fully visible from any single pew. "Your mother spoke at prayer group," he said gently. She gave quite a performance. He didn't ask for my side. He offered me his instead. I reminded those present that honoring one's parents is a complex, lifelong practice. It includes honoring the truth of your own family's safety. Boundaries aren't unchristian. They are a way of telling the truth without hatred. My throat tightened. "Thank you," I said, the two words both small and enormous. Later that night, in the ER break room that smells permanently of old coffee and lemon cleaner, Jennifer leaned against the vending machine and listened as I told the bare facts. She's the nurse who volunteered to cover my shift on Christmas Eve when someone else bailed, the kind of colleague you would choose for a sister if the world let you pick. "My mother did the same to my son," she said softly when I finished. "Different details. Same shape. I wish I'd acted sooner." We stood there a moment in the fluorescent light, two women measuring the architecture of their own inheritance. "Call me if you need me," she added. "If she shows up at work. If you want a witness." "I've got you." The next morning, Sarah texted, "Certified delivery confirmed." We were already prepared for the inevitable scene. If Helen tore up that copy too, we'd send another. If she came to the hospital, I would alert security and log the incident. If she contacted Michael, he would redirect her to Sarah. Calm record. Boring language. Underneath the plan, my anger moved like a river under ice, cold, contained, carrying whole trees. Maya's therapist, Dr. Winters, saw us that afternoon. I brought the journal and the timeline. Maya brought her courage. Dr. Winters reads with her glasses low, the way people do when they want the page and the person to both stay in focus. This exclusion pattern shows clear intentionality, she said after a few minutes, sliding the journal back with care. It is not accidental, and it is not benign. The psychological impact on Maya's sense of belonging and self-worth is significant. She paused. Naming that isn't about blame. It's about accuracy. Accuracy lets us choose a different next step. I felt the sentence land in me like a plank settling into place. For the record, I asked her to put her assessment in writing. Calm record, boring language. For a few hours, the house was quiet. Michael installed the security cameras he'd ordered, one facing the porch, another covering the driveway, because boundary work sometimes needs hardware. I added an entry to the log about Helen's visit and the torn notice. Maya drew at the kitchen table, the soft scratch of pencil on paper, the most healing sound I'd heard in days. When the doorbell rang again at 6 p.m. It was a neighbor with a casserole, the kind of small-town mercy that cities pretend they invented. Heard there was some family stuff, she murmured, cheeks pink. We've got extra lasagna. At 8:17, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number that wasn't unknown. You'll regret this. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't respond. I opened the communication timeline and wrote, 8:17. Anonymous text, implied threat regret. No response. The language looked bland enough to belong in a research paper. That was exactly what I needed. The intervention came on day 7, right on cue and with all the subtlety of a marching band. 6 cars lined our curb. The doorbell rang and rang. Helen swept in with Aunt Louise and Uncle Thomas and cousins, whose names felt like extras in a play I no longer wished to attend. Raymond stood at the rear like a man holding a hat he wasn't wearing. We need to talk as a family, Helen announced, arranging herself on the sofa with a tissue already poised at her eye like a prop. Maya stood beside me, her fingers cold in mine. Michael moved to my other side, an economy of presence. Honor thy father and mother, Raymond began, the cadence unmistakably rehearsed. Have you forgotten that commandment? I thought of Pastor Thomas's call. I thought of Dr. Winters's letter. I pictured the corkboard and the sentence in black marker. I haven't forgotten, I said. I've expanded it. It includes honoring my daughter's dignity. It includes honoring the truth. Helen dappled her eyes, found no tears, and tried a new angle. Think about Maya's reputation, she said carefully, the steel under the satin exposed. She'll be known as the reason her grandparents lost their home. The room went quiet enough to hear the furnace shift. I felt the wobble inside Maya, compassion being used like a crowbar. Michael's hand tightened on mine, the silent signal we'd agreed on when the talks got slippery. I kept my voice even, my sentences boring. There is a 60-day notice to vacate, I said. It was properly served. Financial support has ended. All communication should go through counsel. Aunt Louise scoffed. Is this how you want to be remembered? She asked. As cruel? The word didn't land. In my mind, the refrain told clear. 26 people. No room for Maya. After they left, because they did leave, eventually, even performances have to end. I sat on the edge of Maya's bed while the house recalibrated to quiet. Is it cruel? She asked softly, twisting the corner of her comforter. I thought of the kitchen, of cookie tins and timelines, of the difference between injury and incision. Cruelty aims to cause pain, I said. Boundaries aim to prevent it. They will hurt because they wanted things to stay the same. That's not the same as cruelty. She nodded, absorbing it not as a slogan but as a contour she could draw later without a ruler. Downstairs, the security feed showed an empty porch, a clean rectangle of light. I logged the evening, date, attendees, summary, no raised voices, no threats, statements made. I ended the entry with a line that sounded like a prayer and a policy at once. Proceed as planned. I chose the coffee shop 2 blocks from the police station and 3 from the courthouse, not because I expected trouble, but because boundaries like company. I arrived 20 minutes early and picked the corner table with a view of both entrances. Michael waited in the car with a book and a thermos, close enough to be there if needed, far enough to let me handle my own history. On the table, a manila folder containing a fraction of what lived on my corkboard, and my phone with the screen asleep while the recording app ran beneath the photograph of Maya at her last art show. Calm record. Boring language. Accurate memory. Carla swept in 5 minutes late, designer purse, sunglasses pushed to the top of her head despite December, the practiced glance that inventories a room for status and exits. The familiar knot rose in my stomach, though old, trained obedience to be pleasant for other people's comfort. I sat up straighter and did not move to hug her. "You look tired," she said by way of greeting, sliding into the seat across from me. "This drama is exhausting all of us." Her tone suggested I had chosen drama like a new hobby. I didn't order for her. The barista called her name. She returned with something foamed and caramelized and sat, eyeing the folder at my elbow like it might hiss. "We need to stick together," she began, stirring her drink with sharp clinks. "That's what family does." I let silence do the work, the way Sarah taught me. People who rely on your explanations don't know where to put themselves when you stop handing them maps. "They don't believe you're serious," she pressed on, lowering her voice as if conspiratorial concern might reel me in. "Mom says you'll come to your senses before the deadline. They haven't started packing. It's hard for them at their age." The line had been crafted to hook the softest parts of me. I pictured the corkboard, notice to vacate, 60 days. Certified mail delivered. Timeline entries in clean type. I pictured Maya in that wrinkled dress. "Where will they go?" Carla added, pushing when I didn't answer. "Dad's arthritis is worse. You know Mom can't do stairs." I took a sip of water and felt the glass cool against my hand. "Their housing is no longer my responsibility," I said. The sentence felt like it belonged to someone braver than me, until I heard how evenly I'd said it. Carla blinked, recalibrating to find the opening she assumed would be there. "Look," she said quickly, leaning in. "Maya can have a seat next time. If you'll stop this madness will make sure she's included. I promise." The word promise pinged off the timeline I'd brought, the one-page summary I had printed for this exact pivot. I slid it across the table and watched her eyes land on the title, Selected Exclusions, Maya Morgan, 3-year summary. Birthdays, holidays, weekend cookouts. "You saw this," I said quietly. "You sat at these tables." Carla glanced down, then away, then down again, as if the text might rearrange into something flattering if she looked at it from an angle. You know how Mom is, she said finally, weak as tea. She's old-fashioned. It's not personal. Not personal? The laugh surprised me, a short breath of disbelief with serrated edges. I tapped my finger on one line, Christmas Eve, 2 cars, no room in the car. Another, Grandma to group. Art awards are given to everyone. Another, all cousins received Apple Watches. Maya received socks. Did you ever once speak up? I asked, not accusatory so much as curious from a distance I hadn't felt before. She didn't answer. The absence of a yes filled the space. The eviction stands, I said, sliding the page back into my folder with the kind of tidiness that used to be reserved for laying out flatware at Helen's table. The financial support ends. The auto payments are terminated. Carla's cheeks flushed a color I recognized from childhood tantrums that got praised as spirit. You can't just, she began, voice pitching up. Their emergency doesn't constitute my crisis, I said, borrowing Pastor Thomas's sentence, because good language deserves to be aired. Not anymore. The barista called someone's order. Milk hissed. Outside, a bus sighed to a stop and then shouldered back into traffic. Inside, the recording app counted seconds like stitches in a wound that would close if I left it alone. Carla tried another door. Is this about money? She asked, with the falsely gentle tone people adopt when they want the conversation to be about anything but power. Because we can. This is about my daughter, I said, voice steady. This is about years of targeted exclusion packaged as practicality. This is about you watching it and learning to call it normal because it benefited you. Her mouth tightened. So that's it? She said. 30 years of family ties cut because Maya got her feelings hurt at Christmas? The condescension slid off me the way rain slides off a coat designed to shed it. I closed the folder and stood, not rushed, not dramatic, just finished. Maya is my family, I said. I choose her. I left the last sip of water in the glass, the way people leave a little on their plate to tell themselves they were never hungry to begin with. In the parking lot, Michael looked up from his book and met my eyes, the question there without the pressure. I nodded. You did the right thing, he said when I slid into the passenger seat, and the sentence was so gentle it almost unmade me. Sarah called, he added as we pulled away. They've received the notices. No filings. Legally, they're out of runway. Pastor Thomas left a message too, he continued. He's offered to help them find housing that doesn't involve you. The relief I felt was not about ease. It was about not being the only adult in the room anymore. Without me financing it, I said. Without you financing it, Michael confirmed. At home, Maya's bedroom door stood open. On her desk, Dr. Winters's latest exercise, a family tree rendered as an actual tree, roots, trunk, branches. At the base, she'd lettered our names, Maya, Mom, Michael, inside the trunk where the strength lives. Above us, branches with leaves named for friends and relatives who had shown up in good faith. On the outer edges, a few limbs left bare on purpose, names penciled faintly, not erased but unwatered. I stood there a while, breathing in the quiet arithmetic of it. You nourish what nourishes you. You stop pouring into what drinks and never feeds. Day 30 brought the call I didn't expect. Cousin Martha, whose attendance at family events was sporadic and whose gossip was usually entertaining rather than useful. "They're living in your house?" she said, flat with astonishment rather than accusation. "All these years, Helen said you were chipping in a bit, because Raymond had been so generous with your tuition." "Dad lost his job," I said. "They were facing foreclosure. I bought the house. I've paid everything since." There was a silence on the line large enough to stand in. "Good Lord," she said finally, voice sharpening. "She told people you were ungrateful. She told people you rushed their traditions." I pictured the certified envelopes, the recorded coffee, the corkboard. "They told Maya there wasn't room at the table on Christmas Eve," I said. 26 people. Neighbors. The bridge club. Not her. Martha made a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so bitter. "That sounds like Helen," she said, and in those 5 words I heard the first crack spread through a wall that had stood for decades on the strength of denial alone. By then the intervention had come and gone. Our porch had returned to being wood and light instead of stage and props. Still, the ripples reached. Uncle Robert stopped calling. Aunt Susan's messages shifted tone, the way wind changes when a front moves through. Less certainty, more quiet. The performance was losing its audience, and without witnesses, the script felt thinner. I didn't gloat. Relief isn't triumph. It's oxygen returning to lungs that thought shallow was all there was. On day 45, my phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "We need to talk alone." The 5 words didn't sound like a trap. They sounded like the echo of a woman noticing that gravity applies to her too. I held the screen and called up the image of Maya's tree, the bare branches and the green ones, the way light moved through the spaces we'd cleared. "Are you still sure?" Maya asked from the doorway, reading my face the way children learn to read weather. She looked stronger, sleep solid, laughter returning in small, unremarkable bursts that were the opposite of spectacle. "Some bridges can't be unburned," I said. "And some shouldn't be." I chose another coffee shop for the second conversation, bright, crowded, with a toddler banging a spoon against a high chair in a rhythm that reminded me life is loud and ordinary, and not all moments are verdicts. I set my phone down, the recording app running again, not as a threat, but as a promise to myself that I would remember this accurately too. Carla arrived without sunglasses this time. Mascara smudged under her eyes made her look like a person rather than a role. "We need help with the rental deposit," she said. No preface, no performance. Just a loan. "They'll pay you back." The sentence might have worked 2 months ago. It slid past me now, like a wave that spent itself on rock. "You watched them turn Maya away," I said, not unkindly. "You sat at that table and said nothing." Something in her face shifted, embarrassment, or the first uneasy recognition that silence has edges too. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," she whispered. "That was your choice," I said. "This is mine." She left without finishing her drink. Outside, rain stitched the pavement closed behind her. From her window, Maya watched her aunt walk to her car, shoulders hunched against the weather. "Are you okay?" she asked me when I joined her. The question was earnest, the way children ask when they finally believe the adults might tell them the truth. "I'm better than okay," I said, and the strangest part was that it was true. Better than okay didn't mean happy. It meant exact. It meant I knew where my edges were and could feel the strength in them. It meant the table in our kitchen held 3 chairs that were never in doubt. That night, I updated the timeline. Coffee with Carla, recorded. Offer, seat next time. Response, declined. Statement entered. Their emergency doesn't constitute my crisis. The entry looked plain, almost dull. It felt like granite. Escalation has its own calendar. After Carla's second coffee and the tidy shrinking of my obligations to the size of our own kitchen table, the pressure did not vanish. It concentrated. Helen moved to a new playbook, one whose pages smelled of panic and perfume. First came the calls I didn't take, unknown numbers that were not unknown, messages that opened with sighs and closed with demands. Then came the calls I couldn't avoid, not because I answered, but because they were made for me. On a Tuesday, my supervisor paged me between triage and sutures. "Stephanie, can you step into my office?" Her voice was neutral in the way managers train for, a tone meant to sit on the safe side of trouble. Inside, she folded her hands. "Your mother phoned the hospital. She was distressed. She told the operator you were evicting your elderly parents and asked that we intervene." There was no universe in which an ER could intervene in a private housing matter, but that was not the point. "We've reminded the switchboard to redirect personal calls," she added gently. But if she keeps calling, we'll have to document." I nodded, already writing the entry in my mind. 9:13 a.m. Call to workplace by Helen, content. Eviction complaint. HR notified. Security briefed. Calm record. Boring language. Accurate memory. The next day, an anonymous letter arrived in our mailbox. No return address. Block letters cut from a printer rather than a magazine. A time-traveling threat that wanted to look official. It suggested I might be guilty of elder abuse, which would have been laughable if it hadn't been so efficient at needling the soft underbelly of every daughter who has ever said no to a parent. I photographed the envelope and the letter, slipped both into a plastic sleeve, and added a line to the timeline. Anonymous letter alleging elder abuse, no sender, retained copy, no response. Pastor Thomas called more than once that week, not to pressure, but to preempt. "She's canvassing the church," he said, weary but kind. I told the group that meddling is not ministry, and that slander is not prayer. A few of the women, he added, had pulled him aside after the meeting to say that boundaries at home had saved their faith more than any sermon. "You're not alone in this," he said. "It's a sentence you don't realize you've been waiting to hear until your throat tightens around it." Maya's school counselor emailed, subject line, checking in. Maya mentioned some family stress, she wrote. She's completing assignments, engaged in class, and asked for a quiet space at lunch once this week. Please let us know if she needs accommodations. I stared at the word engaged for a long time, the kind of quiet victory a mother counts like beads. Day 52 brought a new tactic, A phone call to Michael's cousin, who still talks to Carla's husband on Sundays while they mow their separate lawns. Through that back channel, we learned that Helen and Raymond had arrived at Carla's with suitcases and a plan. The plan ended at Carla's doorway. The suitcases returned to the trunk. "We're not set up for live-in," Carla's husband had said. I felt no triumph, only the heavy gravity of consequences arriving where they had always been headed. On day 55, I came off a night shift to find Helen waiting in the hospital parking garage, Raymond beside her like a punctuation mark. "Stephanie," she called, voice slicing the fluorescent dawn. Two nurses slowed nearby, Jennifer among them, eyes on me, ready to be witnesses. "After everything we've done for you," Helen continued, loud enough for concrete to carry the sound. "This is about one dinner? You're going to put us out on the street because your daughter didn't get special treatment." The air smelled of exhaust and something else, hot metal or old anger. I kept my voice at the level of a checklist. "This is about years of targeted exclusion and financial dependence," I said. "Any further communication goes through my attorney." Helen took a step closer, the way people do when distance does not obey them. "She'll be known," she hissed, "as the reason her grandparents lost their home." Jennifer's voice cut clean across the garage. "She has paid your bills for 8 years, she said, arms folded, badge visible. "Please stop harassing my colleague at her workplace." I logged the incident as soon as I got to my car. Date, time, location, witnesses, summary. Calm record. Boring language. Accurate memory. There is a point in any storm when you stop checking the weather app and start moving furniture away from the windows. We installed the last camera, a third one angled to catch the side gate, and put a small sign in the flower bed that announced in cheery font that recording was in progress. Sarah updated the file with Dr. Winters's letter, Pastor Thomas's voicemail transcript, and the bank's payment record. The property manager I'd hired scheduled a pre-move-out walkthrough, clipboard ready. I felt the machine of grown-up life click into a gear I had always thought was reserved for other people. Then, because this is the part of the story that sounds like overkill until you've lived it, the family council returned, day 58, 2 days before the deadline, armed with casseroles and condemnation. 6 cars again. Helen at the front door, tissue poised. Aunt Louise in pearls. Uncle Thomas gripping a Bible like a subpoena. "Just one more month," Aunt Louise pleaded, after the first volley of verses and veiled threats. "Until they find somewhere." Maya's fingers tightened around mine, compassion flexing like a muscle that had been overused. I heard Michael in my head from 2 weeks earlier, his voice steady in the dark when I'd toyed with an extension. "It's not one more month, it's the rest of our lives." I led them to the dining room but didn't ask them to sit. I kept my language as bland as unbuttered toast. "A 60-day notice was served and received," I said. "Financial support has ended. The property manager will conduct a walkthrough on day 60. Keys will be returned that day. I wish you well in finding appropriate housing." Silence. Then Helen's last trump card, laid with trembling care. "Think about how this will look," she said, gaze cutting to Maya. "At graduation. at weddings. People remember. I do hope they do, I said, and surprised myself with the gentle cadence. Psychoian. I hope they remember that when a 16-year-old girl was told there was no room for her at a family table, her mother made a new table. I walked them to the door. They left in an orderly fashion, like parishioners dismissing after a service that hadn't given them the benediction they wanted. That night, I sat on the edge of Maya's bed, the way I had after the first intervention, the way I had when she was small and fevered and needed the cool of my palm on her forehead. Is it cruel to make them leave? She asked again, not testing me so much as checking the measurement. I thought of surgical cuts and jagged tears, of the difference between injury and incision. Cruelty aims to cause pain, I said. Boundaries aim to prevent it. Pain sometimes accompanies a boundary because people are losing access to something they took for granted. That's not the same as cruelty. She nodded, eyes on the ceiling where her glow-in-the-dark stars still made a timid constellation. Do you think Grandma will ever... She didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need an ending. I think people change when they want the truth more than they want control, I said. I don't know what your grandmother wants. Day 60 arrived under an honest sky, gray, brisk, practical. Sarah came early, laptop bag over her shoulder, the process server idling down the block with a newspaper propped like a cliché, the property manager with his camera and checklist, Michael with a toolbox because compassion and competence share a workbench. We reviewed the plan one last time in the kitchen. Keys, release forms, walkthrough, photos, sign, copy, file. Calm record. Boring language. Accurate memory. I put cold water and paper cups on the counter because decency isn't the same as compromise. Helen and Raymond pulled into the driveway at 11:58. The Buick followed by a small rental truck. No Carla. She had stopped returning their calls after the suitcases episode. Helen's face hardened when she saw the clipboard in my hands. This is your last chance to be reasonable, she said, fury and fear braided tight. I handed her the property release forms. I'm not doing this to you, I said. I'm doing this for my daughter. Raymond's expression shifted. The slightest flicker of something that looked like recognition, or regret, or the ghost of both. We should have treated the girl better, he murmured. Not to me, to the air between us where truth sometimes hovers before it lands. Helen signed with angry, jagged strokes and shoved the pen back. We unlocked the door and walked through together. The property manager narrating, walls intact, appliances functional, flooring fair wear. Michael carried a box without being asked because decency, again, isn't the same as surrender. Maya wrapped framed photographs in the newspaper with the same careful hands that had shaped sugar cookies into snowflakes. The truck filled in under 2 hours. The house echoed in the way houses do when the last of the pretending has been carried out. On the porch, Helen thrust the keys toward me like something hot. You'll regret this when we're gone, she said. I already regret the years I let you hurt my daughter, I answered, and took them. The Buick turned the corner. The rental truck followed. The cameras caught nothing dramatic, no curses, no threats, just the plain geometry of departure. I watched the video later, not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to see what closure looks like when you do it with both love and law. It looks like doors opening and closing. It sounds like a key settling on a counter. It feels like air coming back into a room that had been held breathless for too long. That evening, I updated the timeline one last time for this chapter. Day 60, release signed. Keys returned. Walkthrough complete. Possession regained. No incidents. I printed the page and pinned it to the corkboard, then turned off the office light. In the kitchen, Maya stirred a pot of soup. "We'll need more bowls," she said, glancing at the clock. "Jennifer's stopping by. She said she's bringing cornbread." I reached up to the cabinet, counted aloud as I set out 3, then 4, then 5. "Plenty of room," I said. The truth of it warmed the room more than the stove. The day after the keys clinked onto our counter, the house sounded different. It wasn't louder. Nah, it was clearer, like a radio station we'd been listening to through static finally slid into its proper frequency. The security cameras that had watched the goodbye now watched ordinary life, a package delivery, a neighbor's kid retrieving a stray basketball, a mail carrier who waved at the lens without knowing anyone was looking back. I brewed coffee, and the smell didn't remind me of hospital break rooms or tense phone calls. It smelled like our kitchen. We met the property manager at 9 to sign his report. He slid across a manila folder with photographs clipped to the top. "Clean exit," he said. "No drama. Minor touch-ups, which we'll handle before listing." Listing. The word landed with a soft thud. For 8 years, that house had been a siphon and a symbol. Now it would just be a property. I nodded. "Put the sign up this afternoon," I said. The decision didn't spike my pulse. It steadied it. Michael squeezed my hand where the manager couldn't see. We walked the short path to our car without looking over our shoulders. I changed my voicemail that afternoon. "You've reached Stephanie Morgan. If you're calling about legal or housing matters, please contact Sarah Williams at the following number." It felt awkward for 3 calls, and then it felt like insulation. The blocked numbers continued to perform their tiny threats. "You'll regret this, you'll be sorry, family is forever," until the words themselves overplayed their hand and became what they always were, recycled slogans of control. I logged a few out of habit. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I stopped keeping a perfect record. The file was complete. The boundary was doing its job. We were permitted to live. I found Maya at the dining table with brochures fanned like a hand of cards. Oregon State, Evergreen, a couple of California schools that would require us to learn the language of out-of-state tuition. Michael leaned over her shoulder, tracing programs with a finger. "Environmental science," she said, eyes lit in a way that made me think of headlights on a long, open road. Or maybe art ed, if I can't decide. I remembered the line in her journal, "Grandma says I make things complicated," and felt a small vindication I didn't need to share out loud. Complicated, I've learned, is often just what control calls a girl's curiosity. We packed an overnight bag for a campus visit 2 weekends later. I slipped a framed photograph into the side pocket while she brushed her teeth. The Thanksgiving table from the year before, full of faces that knew the difference between performance and presence. When she discovered it at the hotel, she touched the glass and then looked up at me. "Remember who truly loves you," I said. It wasn't a lesson, it was a reminder, the kind that grows with you rather than shrinking you to fit an old chair. On the way home, we drove past the old house. The for sale sign stood clean in the winter light, a rectangle of truth planted in the lawn. I expected a lurch, a wish to turn the wheel and circle the block once, to check the windows like a habit. I didn't. "Do you want to stop?" Michael asked. "No," I said. "It's not our story anymore." We kept going and didn't narrate it for ourselves as bravery. Sometimes you just drive past the thing you've already survived. Jennifer and her husband came for soup that night, cornbread wrapped in a towel like something precious and ordinary. She brought a fold-out file from her bag, the kind you can buy at any office store when you decide your life needs to fit into something you choose. "I told my brother he has to be out in 30 days, she said, voice shaky and luminous. I started a timeline. I wrote a letter. I cried. But I did it. We ate with our elbows on the table, the way exhausted people do when relief has more calories than food. Maya asked Jennifer what color pen she used for her timeline. "Blue," Jennifer grinned. "To feel official." Maya nodded solemnly, as if colors might carry courage the way veins carry blood. We sold the house in 6 weeks. Offers came and went in tidy email threads that felt like a different language from the one my family had tried to speak over us. No righteousness, no shame, just numbers and dates. Sarah reviewed the contract. We signed. Money arrived as a stack of digits on a screen. It looked both obscene and exactly right, the way restitution always looks when you finally quantify the years you didn't count. We paid for a small home improvement project we'd put off, opened a college fund that put an actual shape under Maya's possibilities, and took the rest as a breath we were allowed to hold in the bank. For a while, the silence from the old channels felt like standing in a church. After everyone has gone home, you know the music existed, but the room belongs to quiet again. There were ripples, of course. A cousin sent a Christmas card with a pointed Bible verse and a return address that looked borrowed. An aunt who had publicly lamented my hard heart texted a photo of a new grandbaby and wrote, "I hope you're well," as if the previous months had been a misunderstanding of tone. I didn't reply to every message. I didn't ignore every olive branch. Boundaries are fences, not moats. You still decide which gates open and when. I opened a few, cracked, and closed them gently when the draft felt familiar. Pastor Thomas stopped by one afternoon in March with hand pies his wife had baked and a question in his pocket. "How's the compulsion to apologize?" he asked, smiling at the way I startled. "Reduced," I admitted, and then confessed the weird grief that arrives when you stop being the bridge. "Bridges get walked on," he said. "It's their job. But sometimes the river needs banks more than a crossing." He prayed for Maya's confidence and for Helen's clarity, in that order, and left before his presence could turn into pressure. I wrote the moment in my journal, not the timeline. different book. Different era. Maya thrived in ways that don't make good social media. She slept through the night. She left her phone in another room by accident and didn't panic. She laughed mid-bite and didn't apologize for the sound. She asked for a larger sketchbook and used it. She joined a hiking club and came home muddy and triumphant. When she got her acceptance letter, early, as if the world couldn't wait to call her by name, she stood in the doorway with the envelope in both hands. "It came," she said, eyes wide. I pulled her into a hug that felt like a seam finally sewn. "You earned it," I said into her hair. "All of it." Summer stitched itself together with errands and lists, dorm shopping, immunization records, the small logistics that tell you a child's childhood is packing itself neatly. On move-in day, we carried bins up 3 flights and arranged a bedspread the way girls do when they declare a 4-walled square their own country. I labeled a tin and left it on her desk. Sugar cookies, snowflake shapes. The first week, she texted a photo, crumbs on a textbook, a thumbs up drawn in pen on her wrist. I saved it to a folder I called Joy, because even happy families forget to archive their happiness. 2 years passed like a steady tide. Work, friends, meals, bills, small anniversaries that belonged only to us. On a Wednesday in December, I set our table to its full length and borrowed chairs from neighbors without having to explain a thing. Jennifer and Dave brought cranberry muffins, Pastor Thomas brought cider, and our new next-door couple brought a baby with cheeks like hymnals. Michael lit a string of simple white lights that made our dining room look like a place where ordinary holiness happens. Warm plates, warm hands, warm eyes. Maya moved between kitchen and table with the sure-footed grace of someone who knows she belongs. No one measured her. No one compared her. No one said reasonable like it was a leash. I caught myself at the counter, spoon held midair over potatoes, arrested by a ghost of a sentence, no room at the table. I glanced around. Chairs full of people who came because they meant it, because they carried more than appetite, because they understood that hospitality is not theater but covenant. Michael met my eyes and winked, a private signal we've kept. We made the table, not the performance. I exhaled a laugh that didn't need an explanation. Later, after the last plate dried on the rack and the last guest waved from the walk, Maya found me in the doorway of the hall where our photographs live. She had her acceptance letter framed now, hung next to a candid of the 3 of us on a trail I can't remember the name of. "Mom," she said softly, "thank you for all of it." I thought of the ledger and the corkboard, the certified mail and the cameras, the parking garage and the porch, the coffee shops and the casseroles and the cornbread and the small sold threats that dissolved like sugar in hot water once the heat was removed. "You're welcome," I said. It felt insufficient and perfect. Before bed, I opened my own journal, the one that replaced the timeline when the story became ours to write again. I wrote one last line for this chapter. They said there was no room for my daughter. We built a bigger table. Then I turned off the lamp and went to sleep in a house that didn't ask me to barter my child's belonging for anyone's comfort. 2 winters later, I know the exact sound our house makes on Christmas Eve when it exhales. the low hum of the heater in the vents, the whisper of a pine branch brushing the window, the click of a casserole lid settling when the steam finds its angle. I know the light too, gold and honest. None of the brittle shine I grew up associating with performances we called tradition. There's music, but it isn't choreographed. Laughter, but it isn't rehearsed. If you stood in our doorway and looked down the length of our table, you wouldn't see perfection. You would see belonging. You would see chairs that were pulled close because the people in them came with more than appetite. You would see my daughter moving between stove and guests with the ease of someone who no longer checks for permission before she takes up space. Maya is 20 now. The shadows that used to live under her eyes have moved out. She's declared a double environmental science and art education because she doesn't accept that the world has to choose between what saves us and what sustains us. When she talks about soil health and color theory in the same paragraph, I watch Michael's mouth tilt into the private smile he saves for surprise and pride. We're not the kind of family that makes a big deal of grades, but we are the kind that notices how a girl's voice sounds when she trusts it. Hers sounds like light caught in glass. It sounds like winter sun you can stand under. Jennifer's here, too, standing at our sink with sleeves rolled and a tea towel thrown over one shoulder like an old-fashioned uniform. She set her own boundary a year and a half ago and has been quietly collecting ordinary joys ever since. More sleep, fewer apologies, a living room that belongs to living. Tonight she tells me her brother texts her pictures of receipts, his, not hers, proof to himself that he can carry his own weight. Blue ink, she jokes, winking at Maya. Still official. It's a small, ridiculous grace I would have missed before, back when my eyes were trained to look for emergencies to solve before they became my fault. Etietano. Now I count small graces the way nurses count respirations. Steady, specific, vital. There's a knock at the door. It's Pastor Thomas with a paper bag that swells with cinnamon and a question he asks like a benediction. How's the compulsion to apologize? Under control, I say, only half teasing. He grins and nods to Maya. And how's the space you're taking up? Expanding, she answers, eyes bright. He thanks the room for telling the truth without meanness, for treating boundaries as fences that keep love growing rather than walls that keep people out. He doesn't stay long. The kind of help that lasts leaves before it turns into dependence. If this sounds like a moral, it isn't. It's a record. Calm record. Boring language. Accurate memory. I think sometimes about the way a story gets told, about how families like to crown martyrs and villains so we can feel tidy about outcomes. But the year I stopped being a bridge, stopped inviting people to walk on my back just because the river between us was loud, I learned there's another way to narrate, not who suffered most or who won, but who was fed. Who was safe. Who learned to show up with their whole self and wasn't punished for it. There were texts, of course. A blocked number still tries. It's ancient incantations once in a while. You'll regret this. Family is forever. And now I meet each one with a response it doesn't deserve. Deletion. I don't log them. The file is closed. We sold the house. We moved the energy. We built another table. There are still cousins who send cards that double as sermons. Still a woman in pearls who passes news along with a preface about hoping for reconciliation that hinges on one definition of the word. Everything goes back to how it was. I have learned a better definition. Reconciliation means the ledgers agree with the truth. It is not a return to harm. Tonight, between refilling water glasses and slicing a cranberry-stained loaf, Jennifer corners me with a low-voiced confession in a tone I once recognized as my own. I don't know how to say no without sounding angry. Maya leans against the counter, catching the tail of the sentence. "You can practice on me," she says. Say, "No, not this time," and then count to 5 in your head and smile. Jennifer tries it. It sounds like a new language learned late and well. We laugh. She breathes. And I hear the quiet click again, the one that used to frighten me because it meant a mechanism had engaged, and there would be no going back. Now I know it's the sound of a gear when it finds the tooth it was designed for. It's the sound of forward. My phone buzzes with a blocked text. I don't read it. Instead, I open a different message, a photo from Maya's campus, her teacup on a windowsill, painted with 4 tight lines of color, like a flag of her own making. Beneath it, she's typed, "Remember who truly loves you." It's our private refrain now, not because we need a weapon, but because we wanted a compass. I slide the phone back in my pocket, the way you slip a photograph into your wallet, not to show but to anchor. There is a moment in any gathering when you take stock. Dishes on warmers, hands reaching and being met. An extra chair brought in because someone brought a friend who turned out to be family. I think of the sentence that began this chapter of our life, "There's no room at the table," and then I look at this table and understand that the sentence itself was a kind of theft. There is always room at a table you are willing to remake. Chairs are not relics, they're decisions. I have spare folding chairs hung on hooks in the garage now, just in case, practical as a spare fuse. We don't use them to reward manipulation or pretend a wound didn't happen. We use them when someone shows up with respect, with tenderness, with a desire to participate instead of perform. After dessert, after laughter that bubbles and dies and returns like a tide, after the baby falls asleep in the crook of Michael's arm and he pretends not to notice for a few extra minutes, I go to the hallway where our frames live. The old photographs carry their own weather. There's one from a trail none of us can name, a snapshot of the 3 of us with hair blown wrong and eyes mid-squint, and it's perfect because nothing about it is trying. Beneath that, Maya's acceptance letter hangs like a citizen's certificate, proof she belongs to a country she built with her own maps. The last frame on the bottom row holds a copy of the first page from the timeline that grew stale the day it did its job. 12:24, no seat at table. Offered kitchen. Left gifts. Drove home in rain. I leave it there not as a shrine to harm, but as a cornerstone for the house we raised over it. When the last guest leaves and the last chair is nudged back into place, when the kitchen hums with the soft satisfaction of dishes drying and leftovers labeled, I sit at the table with my journal. The timeline taught me to be factual. The journal has taught me to be faithful. I write one final sentence for this story. the one that replaced the old refrain. They said there was no room for my daughter. We built a bigger table and filled it with people who tell the truth and mean their kindness. Then, because I am my mother's daughter in one good way, I add a practical postscript: spare chairs, hooks by the garage door, sugar cookie tin, top shelf, legal pad, bottom drawer, just in case. If you're reading this because someone sent it to you with a note that said, "This might help," I hope it does. I hope it reminds you that love without self-respect is not love. It's a job description with no pay and no days off. I hope it gives you a sentence to say when your hands shake, "Their emergency doesn't constitute my crisis." I hope it sends you to a hardware store for a camera if you need one, to a post office for certified forms if you must, and to a kitchen where someone hands you a bowl of soup and says, "There's plenty." If you found any part of our story in your own, remember, you get to build a table. You get to decide who sits. You get to keep the ledger honest without becoming cruel. You get to live. Thank you for staying with us until the end. From our home to yours, I wish you health, peace, and the kind of family, chosen or blood, that makes room without being asked. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe to the channel. Share it with someone who needs a gentle push toward their own boundary, and join us for more stories where tenderness and truth sit side by side. May your table be full, your heart defended, and your holidays honest.